So the series I wanted to talk about in this particular segment is the Marvel versus Capcom series. Of course, it started with X-Men Children of the Atom, and then it went to X-Men versus Street Fighter, into Marvel versus Capcom 1, 2, all of those games. And at the time, I didn't really play those. I'd play a little bit at the arcade, but I didn't have a PlayStation or a Saturn to play them at home. So my exposure to everything up to MVC2 was just in the arcade. I played it for a little bit and I was horrible at them. To this day, I'm still bad at those old Marvel games. They move too fast, the combos are too hard for me to perform, but I respect what they do, and I understand that many still hail those old Marvel games. Marvel 2 in particular is held up there as like one of the best video fighting games of all time. For me, my journey started here with Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And for me, this is kind of where it was simplified a little bit. Like, the ceiling for this game is still absolutely nuts, but it was the combination of combos being a little bit easier to perform and me just having a little more experience in the fighting game scene at this point. Like, by the time this came out, I had a year of serious Street Fighter 4 play under my belt, and I was able to do just enough to get, to play this at a level where I could have fun. And I think the thing that I love the most about the Marvel vs. Capcom series is that you're playing in these teams of 3 people, and depending on the 3 people you create, it creates this team dynamic. Like, for example, Wolverine Akuma, classic rushdown team. Wolverine runs in, Akuma dives in with the hurricane kick, locks the opponent down, Wolverine goes backwards, does the slash X Factor, you're dead, right? Or you pick 2 characters that are super lame, and then you have Phoenix in the back, and the other 2 characters are just like throwing fireballs and clogging up the screen, and then level 5 Phoenix comes out, Dark Phoenix hits, and then everybody's dead. And the difference is, when you've got this team dynamic, I think about Marvel vs. Capcom being like the Megazord in Power Rangers, where, these different Power Rangers and these different vehicles come together, and together they're this big giant monster. But if you were to smash the arm of the Megazord and then the arm falls off, then they have less options and they can fight less. And it's the same idea here, where like, as you're taking people out, the options of the other team then dwindle. And I love that idea of being able to limit a person's options as you take them out, and then you can systematically take people out too. For example, the meta for Marvel 3 is to snap Phoenix in as soon as you can and kill her off before she gets to level 5. And when you do that, that's the equivalent of cutting off the Megazord's head. So yeah, that whole team dynamic and the dismantling of teams and how you build your team in order to do these cool things, and how you're able to adapt when your team falls apart, makes the Marvel vs. Capcom series one of my favorites. And of course, a year later, they should have done this as DLC, but they upgraded to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, added 10 new characters. Phoenix Wright's in here as well. The online play is horrible, but from a mechanics perspective, people still play this online today. There's a whole community on Parsec playing this on PC now, to keep the game alive. Because later on in the series, we got, MVCI, and this one made changes that weren't so great. Some of the big downsides: they took out the 3rd character, so it's 2v2. The tag system in this is incredible. You can do absolutely crazy stuff in this that it doesn't get credit for. The big problem was 2 is less than 3. This had a smaller roster. It didn't have any X-Men characters in it because Marvel and Fox were in the middle of their big beef, and the game is ugly. The graphics are really bad. It had a low budget. It had basically no modes. It has great netcode, but pretty much everything else was rough. And MVCI is an unfortunate end to a storied franchise. This game bombed very hard, and if the rumors are true, this is going to be the last Marvel vs. Capcom game for a while, if not ever.